Two themes present themselves in today's readings: suffering and faith. The first reading comes from a prophet who's living in exile. He's crying out to God to save them. How long, O Lord, will you leave us in this place of desolation? And in the gospel, Christ speaks to us about the necessity and the power of faith. The two are connected always in our life: our suffering and our faith. If you think about it, nothing is more powerful to make us cry out to God in faith than when we're suffering. How long, O Lord, I cry for help, but do you hear my prayer? And at the same time, nothing is more powerful to make us doubt that God is even there, that He exists, than when we are suffering. So suffering can take us in one of two directions: either closer to God or further away from Him. The psalmist said, "If today you hear His voice, harden not your heart." There's a saying that by C.S. Lewis. He said, God whispers to us in pleasure. He speaks to us in our conscience, but He shouts to us in pain. Pain is God's megaphone to awaken us to His presence, to call us back to Himself. But the danger is always that we allow the pain that we experience in life, the suffering we go to instead harden our hearts and take us in a direction away from God. And our suffering can come in many forms. We can all find our own reasons for why we might be suffering in our life right now. Some of it might be from the evil that we witness in the world: injustice and violence and poverty. Or it could be the evil in the church when we see immoral clergy or bishops unfaithful to the teachings of the church, or division and confusion over what we believe. It causes us to cry out, "How long, O Lord, are you going to leave us in this state of desolation?" It could be from the suffering that we experience in our own personal lives: broken relationships within our families, health issues, problems with work, problems with our money. We cry out to God, "How long, O Lord, will you leave us in this place of desolation?" And it's especially seen in our struggle against our own sinfulness. How long, O Lord, will you allow me to fall to the same faults over and over again? The same fights against pornography, the same fight against alcohol, the same fight against my depression or my anger. How long are you going to leave me in this state of desolation until you come to rescue me? All these things cause us to suffer, and that suffering cries out, "How long, O Lord?" The problem that we have to face, and this is why I talk about suffering a lot, because we do not come to church to pretend that our life is okay, that everything's perfect. We come to church to encounter Christ in the most real place that we live in this world. And this world is defined by suffering. No matter who you are, what you do, where you go, what you accomplish in life, we can never escape suffering. Julius Caesar, before he became the emperor of Rome, he was the general of the army. So his battles used to take him all around the known world in the West at that time. Someone once asked him, what was it like visiting all those foreign lands and all those beautiful places? He just shrugged his shoulders and he said, well, you know how it is. Wherever you go, there you are. We can't escape our own skin. And we can't escape the suffering and the crosses that so often we carry in life. So we can't change the aspect of life that life is suffering. But what we can change is what we do with the crosses that are presented to us. And remember, suffering can always take us in one of two directions, and it's only taking us at every moment of your life. The suffering you're enduring is taking you either closer to God or further away from God, depending on what you're doing with it. I heard a couple testimonies, and I'll share them both, and they show these two directions that we can go. Back like 15 years ago, when I first started thinking about the faith and actually trying to learn more about it, I heard a testimony from a woman I'd never forgotten after that. She was a Satanist. She was in the occult. She worshipped the devil for 15 years of her life. You just wonder, how does someone get to the point where they would do something like that? And she had grown up her entire life a regular Catholic, received all the sacraments, went to church every Sunday, got married, and she had 3 children. And her third child, a boy, was born with many birth defects. And the strongest love in this world is truly between a mother and her children, but especially a sick child. That's the strongest bond, because the child's so in need of the mother's care. So she would carry him in her arms all the time. She'd sleep with him at night. And when he couldn't swallow his food, so she'd even guide his food down his throat every time she'd feed him. So you can imagine just how intimate their relationship had become. But when the child was about 3 years old, he did pass away. And she said that everyone left the funeral, after the funeral, when they were in the Catholic Church, and she looked at the tabernacle. She said, I still believe in you, but I hate you. And I'll never forgive you for this. And she walked out, and she kept going to Mass on Sundays. So she never told anyone about her anger, but she started going to see a psychiatrist too. And she said she really fell in love with the psychiatrist because he encouraged her in her anger against God. Told her she had all the reasons to resent him for the pain that she suffered, not knowing that he himself was a part of the occult. So over a couple of years, he slowly pulled her into a lot of the demonic worship that they were involved in, which she got in for the next 15 years of her life before a priest was able to break her out. But the pain that she suffered in her life hardened her heart and took her in a direction further and further away from God. I knew another woman. This one, she told me from her own experience. One time when I was talking with her, when she was young, she married a man who had a lot of problems. He was addicted to many things, and her parents tried to tell her not to marry him, that it wouldn't be good for her, but she didn't listen. And so after the marriage, just a couple months, she found herself knocking on her parents' door, asking to come home. And her father said, I love you. We're always going to be here for you. But this was the choice you made, and you can't run away from it now that you're married. And so he shut the door on her. She had nowhere to go. She didn't want to go back to that house that night. So she ended up going to a local Catholic church around the corner. And she said she just walked in. It was all dark except for the sanctuary lamp next to the tabernacle. And she said she sat down there. She said in all her pain and her loneliness and a sense of abandonment that she felt right there, this was the first time in my life that I ever understood Christ's own pain and his loneliness and his abandonment. She goes, then I looked at him on the crucifix. And for the first time, I realized that he went to that cross before me because he knew that I would come to this place in my life, to my cross, and he wanted to meet me there so I wouldn't be alone. So when I talked to her, this was about 20 years after this marriage had after this marriage had taken place, and she said that was one of the greatest gifts that ever happened to her in her life. Because her exact words were, the suffering I endured in my life are what drew me so close and in such an intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. That's why the question is so important for us. Is our suffering, is our pain leading us closer to Christ or further from him? Because that's what ends up defining us in time. What we do with our pain. And there's something deep within us. Just the other day, something really hard happened. And my first impulse, I'm sitting there, I was in the church, and I had to do my prayers, my breviary prayers. Nothing in me wanted to pray. And I didn't want to pray because I was suffering. That was my only excuse. So and I just noticed, why is it every time I get angry that something goes wrong, my first impulse, natural impulse is, I don't want to talk to God right now. I want to go somewhere else. I need to take my pains into some other place, and then I'll get over, I'll feel better, and I'll enter back into a relationship with him. I think this is a natural experience for all of us in our fallen state, that we naturally want to take our pain to the world, to numb it, to look the other way. And we want to come to God in the good times. And that's the temptation of the world, of the devil, to escape our suffering. And we can do that in so many different ways. We can bury our pain in Netflix and television. Why? Because when I'm looking at that, I don't have to be thinking about my own life. We can bury our pain in social media. Because when I'm looking at a phone, I feel at least connected to other people. And I don't have to realize how disconnected I am to my own heart. Why do people drink and do drugs? Like, what's the philosophy behind drugs and alcohol? At least for 1 second, I can escape the anxiety and the suffering that I experience of the weight of my own existence. That's what it is. You feel free, at least for a moment. It's a way of escaping our pain. The problem is, the world's solutions to our suffering never last. That's why when it's over, what do we feel afterwards? Just more empty. Lady Gaga, she had an interview not too long. I don't usually watch Lady Gaga interviews, but I don't even know how this came up, but it was interesting. I was really impressed by it. She was just sitting there. She was saying how my friends, they call me the lily pad because I lily pad, I jump from one substance to another to another. She said she was, so much of her life, she's always battled very deep depression, and she thought when she became a very famous pop star, one of the most famous and richest and most powerful out there, that her depression would go away. It got a lot worse because obviously those things can't satisfy the human heart. So she started doing a lot more drugs in order to compensate for the emptiness. And this is what she said. I don't want to lie anymore. By pretending to be perfect and happy, I don't want to lie about the pain that I feel. The truth is that I can break, and I did break, and I did a lot of things to cope with that pain. And then that's when she became addicted to all these things. And that's what addictions are. Addictions are the places that we take our pain. And that's why we need it over and over and over again, because the pain and the suffering aspect of life never goes away. That's with us. And so what you do with your pain, if you find some substance or some television or whatever that you go to over and over again, it's going to become addiction, because that becomes your refuge every time you suffer. I mean, that's a really good confession thought. When you go to confession, think about the things, where do I generally go when I'm on empty? When I feel like the weight of my existence is overcoming me? When I am suffering, when I feel overwhelmed, where do I look to? Because in the end, that's what our God is. So many people, we talk about the prophets, right? The majority of the Israelites, when they were in exile, they forsook God. And they started worshiping the gods of those lands, right? Well, that's the eternal struggle of man on this earth. Do we stay faithful to God? Do we cry out to Him? Do we allow our suffering to become a prayer and unite us with Him? Or do we look to the gods that are around us to try to satiate our hearts? We all stand in between those two. And what is faith? Faith, in the context of what Christ is saying, in the context of suffering, faith is the act of bringing my suffering to God. Faith is turning my pain in my life into a prayer. How long, O Lord, I cry for help. Come to me. Answer me. And it doesn't mean the suffering goes away. How many people walk away from God because they say, I tried to pray, I tried to bring this to God, and it didn't help. And that's why they go to other places, right? Jesus Christ never came to take away the suffering. He came to join us in it, so that when we met our crosses in life, we would never be in the one place he never wanted us to be, which was alone there. He didn't come to take away our suffering. He came to meet us there so we could encounter it. Because the truth is, there's nothing more powerful in our life to unite us with God than our pain, than our suffering, when we use it as a vehicle to go into communion with him. And that's what we're doing at every single Mass. Like, that's what the Mass is supposed to be training us into. We take the most abject moment of suffering this world has ever seen, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, God in the flesh. We take that act, and what do? Through the power of the Holy Spirit, we turn it into the most perfect prayer. This is my body given up for you. This is my blood poured out for you. It's what we do every single time. We're entering back into that one moment when Jesus Christ offered the deepest suffering this world has ever seen back to the Father. So that we ourselves, coming here time and time again, we're learning to take our suffering, our pain, and offer it back to God. So it becomes a vehicle of communion with him. If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart. Are we allowing our pain to harden our hearts? Is your suffering leading you closer to God or further away from it? Faith and suffering. There's nothing more powerful in life to cause us to cry out to God in faith than suffering. There's nothing more powerful in life to cause us to leave God behind and lose faith altogether than suffering. Into which direction is your suffering leading you?